Greetings, ladies and mentalgets, and welcome to this latest episode of Tales from Outer Space, where I take a space-related story from around the internet and read it out loud for your enjoyment. All the relevant links are down below. Please don't forget to do the usual YouTube gumph, because if you don't, the nanite swarms will steal your other sock. But more importantly, as always, I hope that you enjoy. I'd quickly like to thank the following Tier 5 patrons and channel members for supporting the channel: Datamagnet and Bob the Dragon. Thank you very much. New Old War, written by radius55. In 2075, humanity discovered that it was not alone. There were no mysterious transmissions, no dramatic requests to speak to a leader, and no cities glassed from orbit. Instead, a craft the size of a pre-space aircraft carrier slid into the shipyards at L2, transmitted a manifest, and requested docking. When a group of world leaders attempted to contact the aliens and determine exactly where their constituents would fit in the inevitable new galactic order, they were stunned to find that instead of a diplomatic or exploratory craft, they were dealing with the spacefaring equivalent of a tramp freighter. Freighter or not, there was shake-ups to go around, along with blind explanations of the true purpose. The ship sent a long list of technical documents and scientific theories that they were willing to share, for a price. Companies hoping to get the edge on their competition took one look at the costs and blanched. Not having any up-to-date industries in the galactic terms, the price would have been paid in heavy elements, and lots of them. Literal years of human production for a few data files. But the US and the Russo-Sino alliance were together able to scrape together enough gold, platinum, osmium, iridium, and palladium to buy 4 pieces of information. The first was a rough map of the local galactic neighborhood, complete with known territories and dossiers of other civilizations. The second was a high-efficiency vacuum energy power plant design. Third involved plans for an inertialess drive capable of several dozen Gs of acceleration. And finally, there was the hyperdrive. It turned out that there were dimensions residing above the one we fondly refer to as reality, each at a higher energy level than the last, but smaller overall size. So a ship traveling in one appeared to be going much faster than ships of a lower dimensional band. At about 2.7 times as fast, in fact, for each band crossed. But the increased energy cost of breaking the walls between dimensions put a limit on the speeds the ship could attain. The highest levels the galactic ships could reach were the Kappa bands, with an effective velocity multiplier of 8,100. The tech humans were given was substantially lower. Hyperdrives were not without problems. A ship in a higher band could detect by its wake, while ships below were effectively invisible. Translating in gravity wells became more and more difficult as the field increased. Upper-level bands were blocked within light days of a G2 like Sol, and an alpha translation would be impossible with 1.5 AU. Even gas giants beyond that distance could block jumps nearby, and any ship in hyperspace still had to provide its own acceleration. The dimensions only increased effective velocity and did not create the velocity themselves. Regardless of its drawbacks, hyperspace travel was the only game in town, and humanity needed it. The governments of the US and Russo-Sino alliance held that key and formed the Confederate of Nations of Sol, CNS, to represent Terran interests in the greater galactic community. And so, ships carrying human traders, soldiers, miners, spies, diplomats, and colonists left the system of their birth. They brought with them hopes and dreams and an overriding drive for the human race to grow, to fill the rightful place in the universe. 83 years after first contact. Well, I suppose it was inevitable, thought Admiral Caitlin Petrovich, commander of the first beaten Jovian orbit. The CNS had grown over the decades. Tau Ceti F was now formerly known as Nova Terra and had been the site of the first human colony. Just 10 years earlier, Captain B had been renamed New Slavobard and became the second terrestrial world to be colonized. And there were dozens of outposts in several other systems, including Alpha Centauri, Wolf 359, and Epsilon Eridani. While no powerhouse, humanity was a fast-growing species, and already known for their materials extraction, light manufacturing, and mercenaries. The CNS had pushed technology heavily in those years following the initial data dump, and things had come a long way from the CNSS adventurer plodding through the gamma bands at a mere 6 times the effective speed of light. Now, humans built craft that could reach the eta band of an effective velocity of 1,000 times, coupled with propulsion systems capable of sustaining a vacuum velocity of 0.6 c. Humanity's ships could sustain an end-space speeds of about 1.8 light-years per day. Not that it'll do much for us here, she mused ironically. The Caprix can reach the theta bands and have at least a 15% on us in acceleration. Top speed is higher too. The Caprip Collective, so known by humanity since their own name was unpronounceable by human tongue or writing, was by no means a galactic player. Other powers had tens and hundreds of times the weight in ships, armies to dwarf their forces, and technology centuries ahead of the Caprix. Unfortunately, those powers were far too interested in what their peers were doing to worry about a few upstarts were doing as long as they didn't try start anything with their betters. So the Capric Collective had begun snapping up independent star systems. When that drew no response besides a handful of strongly worded condemnations, they graduated to small interstellar polities. And humanity was definitely on the small side, though still the largest acquisition by a sustainable margin. Initially, there had been minor incidents. Ships would appear at the edge of the system boundary and warp out just before forces could reach weapons range. Comsats and unnamed probes were destroyed during lightning passes through the system by high-speed craft. Jamming devices were released from our system and allowed to drift into orbit around planets before going active and disrupting communications until localized and destroyed. Convoys reported being shattered by unknown craft, and then some convoys failed to report at all, none of which could be directly blamed on the Caprix, though the CNS received numerous suggestions via diplomatic channels that the attacks could be stopped by the improved security joining the collective would bring. This changed when the Commodore Petrovich led her task force to a mousetrap and destroyed a raiding force around Wolf 359. Despite heavy losses, human forces shattered both enemy destroyers and hammered the sole cruiser nearly into scrap. Examinations of the captured cruiser showed without a doubt its Capric origin, complete with the original mission orders in the central computer. The collective denounced the records as false, of course. In turn, they produced documents showing the craft were on a diplomatic mission that diverted in response to a human distress beacon, probably crewed entirely by women and children with a cargo of neo-puppies, one commander quipped. They further demanded the return of their cruiser and reparations equaling the entire years of Earth's growth system product. And Petrovich's head, quite literally, on that last point, upon careful consideration, CNS Highcom did send back the cruiser, or its hulk, stripped of every bit of technology and so structurally compromised as to be useless for anything but scrap. Inside the derelict's bridge was a copy of a citation that accompanied now Admiral Petrovich Award of the Navy Star. They got the message. Now, just a standard human month later, their fleet had arrived at Sol. Xenopsychologists predicted that this would be the first target. When offended, Caprix tended to go directly for the heart of their prey. And return of the cruiser had been a very deliberately crafted insult. The response to that insult had massed about 25 light seconds beyond Jupiter, just inside an invisible line preventing ascension into hyper, and been moving closer for the past 40 minutes. Humanity had always based its fleet in Callisto Station. From that location, they were shielded from surprise attacks by the gravity shadow of a gas giant, but able to trap any forces intent on invading the inner system between themselves and the array of orbital defenses surrounding Mars and Earth. Rather than take the heavier losses a direct attack on Terra would incur, the Capric fleet chose to engage the human ships directly and hammer the planet at their leisure. A pointed look from her flag captain broke the Admiral's contemplations. She looked at the display in time to see a fleet outnumbering her own by 3-2, and with a substantial technological edge, approaching Point November. There was nothing particularly special about November in and of itself, except it marked a section of space 9 light seconds from a hypershadow's edge and 10 from her forces. Considering effective energy weapons range was about a light second, it was as good a midway point as any on inevitable Copric advance. "About time, don't you think, Captain?" she asked. "As good as it's probably going to get," Captain Stanford replied. "Pity we're not closer, though." "We wouldn't last 10 minutes out there, but I see your point. Still, there's always the sensor feed." Turning to look at the communications officer, Petrovich ordered, "Transmit code Fulton, Lieutenant." At her words, the superluminal broadcast was transmitted from the flagship. A few seconds later, it was received and acknowledged, and the battle began. The Kubrick fleet had no warning. One moment, they were hurtling through space, preparing for the skew turn that they'd need to slow the engagement velocity with the hated human fleet. The next, 8 human ships appeared at the interplanetary equivalent of a knife fighting range and opened fire with beams and heavy ship-guided missiles, which should have been impossible. There were no stealth systems in the universe capable of evading sensors at those ranges, and even if they had somehow been able to make a drop from hyper this close to a gas giant, they would have showed up like beacons on sensors in that higher energy dimension. But there they were, and their salvo had just destroyed a full 10th of the fleet and damaged twice that number. An enormously larger, if somewhat ragged, wave of return fire rushed to meet the interlopers and impacted nothing. Missiles and beams crisscrossed in space that had until seconds ago contained machine and man, but there were no hits. Sensors focused on the area as confusion reigned at the Kubrick flag deck. There was absolutely no sign of those phantom ships in this dimension or anyone observable by sensors. What they did not know was that the ships weren't actually in any dimension those sensors were capable of scanning. While news of the new human weapon would travel far and wide, the exact manner in which the ships operated remained a closely held secret for some time. It was only much later that anything became known beyond the basic facts. At that point, there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth amongst scientists and defense contractors the galaxy over. There was absolutely no new technology in what the humans had done. Instead, they took a page from the great naval campaigns of the 19th and 20th human centuries, specifically the submarines. Human scientists focused on 3 major points concerning the structure of hyperspace. Ships in lower bands could observe ones in higher, but not vice versa. Gravity shadows tended to be less pronounced in the lower bands, and lower bands were slower than the high ones. So, they wondered, while everyone else is interested in going higher and faster, could lower and slower and stealthier be the way to go? From that research, humanity became the first species to tap into subspace. So less than 90 seconds later, the ships reappeared and launched yet another salvo. Again, the shots flew true and left the fleet with just over 2/3 of its craft in a battle-worthy condition. The High Admiral in command frantically ordered a retreat. They couldn't fight ships that appeared as if it had been mists of legends, only to fade away when fired upon. They were sailors, not demon slayers. But the laws of physics were unavoidable, and having spent 40 minutes building velocity, the ships were moving at a fair rate. A smart commander might have ordered the ships to increase forward thrust in hopes of shooting through the kill zone as quickly as possible. A calm commander would have kept in mind that the standard human fleet now accelerating towards his own when making his calculations. But while competent in most matters relating to squashing minor nations, the High Admiral was neither calm nor particularly smart. Instead, he ordered 180-degree course change at full acceleration. The Ghost Squadron appeared 3 more times to rake the Kubrick battle fleet with fire. Following their last run, a mere 1/5 of the once mighty force were left capable of independent movement, and most of those only slowly. Faced with the prospect of undetectable killers in their ranks and the now larger and more powerful fleet moving in from their rear, The ships promptly surrendered. At least their leader was spared the humiliation of personally transmitting the message, his flagship having eaten a 3-gigaton penetrator during the 4th attack by the human squadron. Following the complete capture or destruction of a fleet comprising of half the Kupric Collective's effective space combat power in such a spectacularly one-sided manner, the oligarchy in charge was promptly overthrown. Not that this resulted in any real changes in how the nation was run, the new leaders merely being the political rivals of the old. But it did give 8 systems the opportunity to break away from the collective while its capability to project power was heavily reduced. Each system signed mutual defensive treaties with the CNS, and at least 2 became outright signatories to a Confederation charter. With the fleet in shambles, system defecting, and 1 attempt to recapture territory turned back by a sudden appearance of 4 human subspace ships, the collective sued for peace. And thus, human power made its first true showing amongst the stars. It would not be the last. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.